All right. I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. May we all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? And Mr. Kiley, would you mind leading us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I ask us all to remain standing. A RTM member, a long-standing RTM member, and since we're ex officio members of that body, I thought it appropriate that we have a moment of silence for the Hal Schwartz and his family who lost Hal's mother just a few days ago. Thank you. Okay, first up, item number 3, resignation, and this is for information only. From the Land Acquisition Commission, Linda Batchelder, an unaffiliated from 175 Shoreham Village Drive. Her term was 11/12 through 11/16, and her resignation date was June 16, 2015. We will be looking for a replacement on the Land Acquisition Committee. Next item is first of Selectmen appointments. This is also for information only. The Parking Authority, Todd J. Chandler, unaffiliated, from 65 Hilltop Drive. Term is 11/11 through 11/16. This is to fill a vacancy for Joanne Sheehan, who resigned. The appointment date was June 15th, 2015. Next up, for the Board of Selectmen approval, to hear, consider, and act upon the following reappointment as recommended by the Board of Library Trustees. The Board of Library Trustees, Elizabeth McLaughlin, Republican, 90 Webb Road. Her term would be July 15 through July 21. May I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
A second.
Second.
Any comments or discussion?
I'd like to thank Mrs. McLaughlin for stepping up to volunteer and serve again on the board.
And I'd just like to note that her resume states that she's currently a board member with a special emphasis on improving library services to senior housing facilities, and I think that's a great kind of orientation for a board member, especially for homebound seniors. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that effort.
Yeah, and signing up again, certainly our library, and specifically the Fairfield Public Library, but along with Pequot, have been a topic of a lot of discussion, especially around budget time in the past few years. I know with every trip to either the public library, our main branch, or the Fairfield Woods branch, I learn a lot more about our library services, the changing nature of library services, and the changing ways that our libraries service our community. As the cliche goes, it's a lot more than just books these days. It's not your grandfather's library anymore. So I'm thrilled that she's signing up again. I'm very pleased with the direction the library is going in and how it's expanded services to our town. Any further comments?
No?
Any comments from the public? Back to the board. We're ready to vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Congratulations, Ms. McLaughlin. All right. Next item, Director of Public Works, to hear a report on sidewalks. Good for joining us. If you would just please introduce yourself.
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Joseph Michelangelo, Director of Public Works, and with me is Bill Hurley, the town's engineering manager. And similar to what we've done the last year or so with our roads, with our capital vehicles, with our sanitary sewers in town, did a sort of a State of the Union report, a status report on our sidewalks. So there was a narrative that was distributed in your package. And what I'll do is I'll distribute a stripped-down version, which I'll use for this
Oh, good.
presentation purpose, which has a lot of the charts and stuff, which I will sort of talk through. And the way we did the sidewalk survey, in the sidewalk survey, we literally walked every foot of sidewalk in town, and we started probably late summer, early fall, and obviously we got sidetracked with the winter, and then we completed it this winter this spring, and then went into the data interpretation phase. So what you see in the first part is just the inventory. So we have 110 miles of sidewalk throughout town, and the sidewalk network proved in some ways it was harder than rating our roads, because if you go down a road, a 1,000-foot road is generally fairly uniform. It's all asphalt. It was all constructed at the same time. So usually if you're at the 100-foot mark or the 500-foot mark or the 800-foot mark, you expect to see the same thing. Because a lot of our sidewalks, unless they were installed as part of a subdivision where it was installed at one time, the make and model changes. You could have a 5-year-old sidewalk in one stretch. You go 100 foot down the road, you could have a 10-year-old sidewalk. It goes from asphalt to concrete. So it's very site-specific and in some ways much more intensive than doing a road survey. So what we did, we had several different personnel evaluate our sidewalks. To set up a criteria, what we did, and you see on the first page there, we had them rate them poor, fair, good, and excellent. And because we had different people, we sat down together and we talked about what does fair mean, what does poor mean, what does good mean, what does excellent mean. And we tried to classify them in range, as you see on page 1, in different time span. What needs to be replaced in year 1 or 2? What is year 3 and 5? What is year 5 and 10? What is year 10 and above? So not only was all the evaluators, had the same ground rules to proceed, but in some ways it's a lot like the way we think about our normal budgets, our roofs, our vehicles. What do we have to think of this year or next year? What do we have to think of a 5-year horizon? What do we have to think in a 10-year horizon? What is back further off into the future? So that was sort of like the ground rules that we went forward with. And on page 2 of the handout there, you see the different categories. So we went our different type of sidewalks, asphalt, concrete, and bluestone. So the different what was in the best category, or the worst category, what was in fair condition, good condition, excellent condition. So these you could think of as like, put them in the different categories. And if you look at the distribution of these, if you look at the theoretical distribution where they would be on the front page again, if we think about the life of a concrete sidewalk, the life of an asphalt sidewalk, different categories, well, these results came out better than expected. If we just did it purely on a statistical basis, we would have expected it not to be this good based on the lifespan. So our sidewalks are in good condition as far as the distribution is. There's more, in these 4 categories, they're weighted to our favor, if that's clear. So what we did when we got those results of our different categories, we used contractors' prices, and once again, these are for budget purposes, these aren't for construction purposes, just projecting on what we're looking at for our whole inventory of roads in the near future, 5-year, 10-year horizon. And once again, this is using contractor prices because we want an all-in price. So basically the prices, or the budget prices, are basically, even with the town services, are generally higher or more than we've been expending in the current budget years. So as a overall estimate, probably somewhere around, and you see the years 1 and 2, the all-in number is $400,000. If you take what it would be just for town forces, 40% we estimate would probably be about $160,000, and that's typically what well above what we've been budgeting. Typically we budget $80,000 a year, $100,000 a year. So to maintain our network going forward, based on our complete inventory of concrete and asphalt sidewalks, once again, we feel we have to invest more than we do with our current sidewalk program. And the final page just has some conceptual numbers of what what our network is worth, how much we have to invest on a yearly basis, etc. So I know the complete written report was distributed Monday. And once again, it's about a 10 or 12-page document. We tried to summarize this, and we feel it was for our first crack at the sidewalk network, we felt it was a very worthwhile and beneficial survey that will have use in our next year's budget planning process and as we go forward for tracking purposes to see how we're doing.
Any questions from the board?
You just answered one of my questions, which is this is the first time this has ever been done, correct, by the town of Fairfield. And then I noted in your longer report that several decades ago, I don't know how many decades ago, the DOT had said we are no longer responsible for maintaining the sidewalks. Is that correct?
Correct, and that's from Mr. Hurley and Mr. Bartley, who have been with the town a lot longer than I have. So I think that was years ago that the responsibility got abandoned by the state.
Just to be clear, that was their responsibility on state roads.
Correct. Yeah, only on state roads.
Okay, so things like the post road, they used to do sidewalks, then they stopped, is what we're saying.
If I may,
If you reach the mic. Sorry, Sheila, just
That's
wanted to
okay.
clarify.
Bill Hurley, engineering manager. Yeah, the state, a couple of decades ago, the state really emphasized a new policy that they had enacted where they basically want to, or they made a directive where it was curb-to-curb maintenance. In other words, they'd be responsible curb-to-curb maintenance, that anything beyond the curb, although it'd still be in the state right-of-way, would be the responsibility of the municipalities.
So when they did that, did they provide any funding to us to pick up that responsibility?
No.
Okay.
So that would be, as we're used to seeing on the Board of Ed side of the budget, that would be what's called an unfunded mandate from the town.
That's correct.
So it,
And that was my next
Sorry.
point, really, in terms of the budget. So you kind of said, listen, we've got to get a handle on whether or not we're accurately funding in our budget line what we need for sidewalk maintenance. So first, we need to do an inventory, and then secondly, we need to actually assess, you know, if we look at short versus long-term, how much we need to budget for.
Correct.
Correct? Okay. And one other question. Have you seen a change in the use of materials? You talk about concrete, asphalt, and bluestone. Has concrete kind of increased over the years, therefore lessening the maintenance, or is that kind of, because I know paving is, you know, there's so much going on with science and paving, and I'm, you know, in terms of keeping our costs down, and I'm wondering if the same thing is going on with sidewalk maintenance?
No, you know, the traditional means of, you know, concrete and asphalt, you know, there's, it's not similar to our road things where we use different techniques or stuff. It's basically mostly all concrete or mostly all asphalt. And, you know, we talked about in the report some of the benefits of it, and concrete lasts longer, so it
Right.
lasts much longer. So once again, you know, you could have a sidewalk that was installed in 1975 that is in our road that is perfectly functional, but it starts to get a little old and tired. So a lot of it is aesthetics more than anything else. And concrete, you know, once again, after 20 years, it gets old and tired too. So even if you don't have a defect, it's probably about time to replace it. And the benefit of that is it looks newer more often. But you know, sidewalks function perfect. Asphalt sidewalks function perfectly well. They're a great value as far as price is concerned. And, you know, on a lot of our longer stretches of road, we have, you know, asphalt sidewalks, and our methodology is to, you know, there's back and forth over the years, whether, you know, I know TPZ for subdivisions requires sidewalks if they're, concrete sidewalks if they're appropriate, but our methodology is replace them in kind, so where we have asphalt
Okay.
sidewalks, we'll replace them with asphalt.
Okay.
Concrete with concrete.
I
And,
see.
you know, we did a large project on Gould Manor several years ago with asphalt. Came out great, functional for the next 20 years. I don't see any, you know, I don't see any detriment to that over concrete. I think it's, you know, top notch, and it serves our community well.
If I can just add that we have a tendency to use asphalt sidewalks when there's a lot of street trees or nearby trees because they have a tendency to pop up the
The
walk,
roots,
and
yeah.
it's easier to overlay or repair an asphalt
I see.
sidewalk
So there
than
is
it would
there
be
is
a
a science
concrete.
to
There's a
your
little bit,
method.
yeah,
Thank you very much.
sure.
Yeah. Kevin?
Please. Thank you, guys. Question on the pricing, and I know you're quoting it as contractor's pricing. Is this today's price? Do you project the price out? How did you arrive at the pricing per linear foot?
That's on today's prices, so everything
Okay.
is today's dollar.
Okay.
And that's a pretty all-inclusive price, and that's a conservative price. So if anything, we think the numbers will be lower, not higher than that. And once again, that was just to get a level playing field. That is a bid price if we did it out, and obviously if we did it with in-house funded personnel, we basically pay for materials and forms, so would reduce it substantially. We just wanted to create that as the baseline.
Right, so that's a pretty standard $40 per linear foot for a concrete, whatever, it's like 2 inches deep or whatever it is.
Probably at least 4 or 5
4 or
inches.
5, okay, excuse me.
Yeah, and an average of 5 feet wide.
Okay, all right.
So on a square footage basis, $8 a square foot, which is a comfortable price. It's a pretty decent price. We're confident.
If I may, we just had a recent bid open, it was $750. So it's up a little bit, and that maybe to compensate for a driveway adjustment or something like that. So it's fairly close, but like Joe said, it's a little bit on the conservative side. If the town forces were to do it, it'd be a slight saving.
So you're saying $750 a square foot,
Right.
which equates to $35.40 a linear foot, basically, if it's 5 feet wide, right, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. If we, and you touched on my other question, thank you. Just give us some basic parameters on if we were to bring some of the work inside. You know, the first question would be, what type of bandwidth might we have to attack some of the work? And in addition to that, what might we save either in the short term or over time by either balancing it with contractors or bringing as much of it in-house as possible?
Okay. And like we do with a lot of our work, with
Right.
this type of work, I think this is the type of work that our in-house construction crews are good at. So unless we have a demand on some other projects, this is sort of like the baseline that we like to have our guys do and do in-house. Once again, when we have multiple projects going on, we'll always have the baseline, we always have plenty of work to do. So whether we're doing road work or drainage or catch basins or
Right.
playing fields, there's always that base work, and I think this is a good use of our town forces. We talk about that a lot, like, there's work like, cutting fields and, collecting garbage, which I think is best done, sometimes private sources, but I think a lot of times this is a good candidate for our in-house guys to do.
Okay. But just very, very roughly, if the number is $400,000 a year on an optimum view, right? And if it was possible to bring in maybe half of that work and then, pay for the materials, it's conceivable that you could do that work if it could be done within that season and maybe knock 400 down to 250, 300, give or take some change. By the time they reduce the expenses and add in the materials that we would need to go and
Correct.
purchase.
Yeah, and our figure for all in-house with all town crews is probably about 40% of this total.
That was my next
So
question.
that's the all town employees
Right.
factor. And once again, the trucks are bought, the men are on payroll, so basically
Right.
the only expenses are your forms and your either asphalt or your
Right.
concrete. So, and that's once again a ballpark that we estimate about 40% of
So
that.
that would bring you down to about roughly, if you
It's-
split the baby in half.
It's in
It's
on the
it's 550, if you look at on
Page
page, I'm looking at
four.
page 4.
yeah.
If you add up on the top right, you add up the numbers on the right-hand side, it comes out to roughly $550,000 a year. And that's based on the different life cycles of different types of sidewalks.
Correct.
Adding all three together, assuming they're all on doing 1/40th of the 40-year, 1/20th of the 20-year, and 1/50th of the 50-year
Okay.
life sidewalks.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that'll come out to $550 a year, so
Yeah.
40% of that would be roughly in the 2.25 range.
Correct.
Yeah.
I think you
Yeah,
added
that's
it-
about right.
I think you added it correctly on the sheet. There is a It is on the sheet, but you added it right on the sheet. It's wrong.
Yeah, I'm a victim of an engineering education. You always add up the numbers, sorry. However.
That makes sense. So you could reduce it significantly
Or a
Well,
blend of each.
by blending it, yeah.
If I can follow up
Please.
on your point, because I think and one, I compliment you on saying, hey, it'd be 40% of that, but that would be our direct cost. But from a budgeted standpoint, incrementally to the budget would only be the materials, because the people you're talking about are on payroll.
Yeah.
If this is the project they're assigned, they'd be doing this. So the difference would be there might be an opportunity cost, and it would be doing this instead of something else for a project. But we wouldn't see an increase in taxes if we did this in-house.
Correct.
Did I phrase that correctly?
Exactly, yeah.
Got it.
Okay. So, and you said this is the work we're good at, so this is something we do.
If I may add,
Go ahead.
our DPW, about 2 years ago, did the Safe Routes to School, the sidewalks around the Ludlow campus, as part of a grant, and they had done about 2 miles of mostly concrete sidewalk, which the neighborhoods that they dealt with, they had very positive results. So, just as an example of one that they've done recently.
And when I say they're good at it, I think it's good value too. And you know, we were fortunate to have a private contractor do a lot of work around Fairfield U, on Barlow, up North Benson, up Round Hill in the last few years since I've been here. And if I compare that to our job on Gould Manor, once again, a long project, their work was good, ours was good. No difference in the workmanship, craftsmanship. We were able to knock out that project pretty efficiently, and I think it's good value, not just we're good at it, it's a good value for the town.
Right.
So the issue would be, it'd be minimal cost to the taxpayers, assuming we have the time available, the capacity, if you will, to do this project,
Correct.
and that we didn't have to do it on overtime.
And also
Definitely.
the grants, you have to factor in the grant. I mean, that's kind of an unknown. It's out there and you're going to take advantage of every opportunity, but how do we kind of figure that into the costs?
Yeah, correct. This
matrix?
doesn't, and I think that's the last line on these sheets. We don't include any grant opportunities in this, and we've been fortunate to get grants for the Kings Highway area.
Right.
You know, by the Board of Ed building, the upper post road between Mill Plain and Pine Creek. So we've been fortunate to get quite a few grants, and we continue to both steep and lots that pursue these, so that could offset the direct town cost also.
And there've been some streetscape grants within that, specifically the Post Road one, I think, was part of a streetscape program.
Downtown.
So we've been able to use all those. So I think, one, thank you for laying this out. I think you laid out some good choices here, and I think there's a certain clarity in terms of how you put it together, which is very beneficial. But just to clarify, for the last time we talked a couple of years ago, we walked the sidewalks when we had some issues downtown. I'm hearing back from a number of people, you guys have done a great job in addressing some of the critical issues in the downtown sidewalk, so thank you for that. It also was obvious as we talked through it that we really didn't have at that time a sidewalk maintenance program, where we went back and looked at this. And I think what you're doing here is literally for the first time constructing a sidewalk maintenance program that will give us targets on an annual basis. So now the challenge as we go through the budget process going forward will be to say, okay, given all the projects we have to do, where do these fit as a priority, and can we do this? Because as we build this in, this will, in essence, chew up a certain amount of capacity every year.
Yeah.
Unlike many projects, we don't get this, we're not going to be done with this. This is the equivalent of $550,000 worth of work is on the docket every year.
Correct, yeah. Yeah. Just
Okay.
like painting the George Washington Bridge, you start on one end, and then when you're done, you start up again.
Yep.
I was going to
Very
use
good.
the Golden Gate.
Any further questions from the board?
Just one last question for me. On the work we're doing over on Kings Highway, how many linear feet are we doing in that project, or how many have been bid out, quoted?
For the Kings Highway project, it's currently in design.
Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't reached that stage yet, but I believe we were trying to get 2 miles of sidewalk. It was going to go from about the correct me if the name has changed, but we'll use streets instead of businesses.
That's fine, yeah.
Chambers Street all the way to Villa Avenue was the Kings Highway
The
section.
expanse.
So that's
Yeah.
roughly 2 miles.
Well, again, it's like about a mile, but it's both sides
Both
of
sides,
the
Right,
the
right,
street.
right.
So, yeah,
So
I
linear
remember that
feet,
too, yeah.
linear feet is what?
About 10,000.
About 10,000? And what is that project coming in at? If we were to do both those, both sides, 2 miles, where is that roughly coming in at?
Well, the grant is about a $2 million grant, and it would cover, and this is my rough estimate, but about $1.5 million would be for sidewalks, 200,000 for design, 200,000 for the inspection, and maybe 100,000 for testing, or maybe it would go up to 1.6, million to cover the sidewalk.
Right, and I'm trying to tie that back to this, because this is great information, and maybe it's not quite apples to apples, and you can help me understand where I'm off, but here, if you're looking at concrete, you've got 16,000 linear feet, roughly 3 miles, give or take, right? At $40 a foot, 623K. So if that's relatively accurate at $40 per foot contractor's price, I'm still trying to reconcile how 2 miles, which would be 2/3 of this, could cost a multiple of that.
Well, there's a couple of things. With the state project, they are also looking at maybe either improving or eliminating the medians that are there on Route 1. If we have to touch the curb, that curb gets very expensive. We have to cut the state road. We have to relay the curb. It has to be a full-depth curb. They don't allow an extruded curb that the town can use because you're on a state highway. And then we're going to widen out the sidewalks
And
as well.
brickwork
So,
associated.
yeah, there could be brickwork, and then there could also be some traffic they're going to look at traffic signal improvements for push buttons to cross the road and have ADA ramps as well. So it's a little bit broader. This is strictly sidewalk replacement. You take out what was there, and then you put back.
The Kings Highway is an improvement project, it's not an in-kind replacement.
Right, yeah, and that makes sense, but it wasn't like it was 10 or 20% different, it was, 100% difference. Okay.
But I'm glad to hear you bring that up, because my next question is going to be, you take your life into your hands trying to cross, and I see people from business, trying to cross that street. So there are plans to put in a crosswalk or a signal or a median or something, because it's quite
There's-
dangerous
We
there.
have the design engineer looking at different phases, because if you take out a median, you could put in bike routes, you can do certain things. But then people would argue the medians kind of act as a pedestrian refuge.
You have to.
So there might, and there's
Wait,
also
yeah.
a hybrid plan where maybe at the critical intersections where we know people are going to cross, we'll keep the islands, but maybe take out some of the islands at other areas where it's not needed, or we're looking at maybe enhancing the, like Joe had said, with brick or some other, because right now it's just asphalt islands, which if you come out of that Board of Ed building, it's dark, and I've known and I've seen, actually I did it once
Yeah.
myself, where I hit the median because it's black.
Yeah.
It's blacktop against blacktop, and you hit the edge of the median there, so it can't be the safest or most attractive looking thing.
That's a tough left.
But,
So that's in process
and
right
that's-
now, the
right, that's
planning in terms of
process,
what makes
and
the
then-
most sense?
And then they will send it back to town with, say, maybe 2 or 3 different options. We'll discuss it with the engineer, and then we will present it again to the public, as there'll be a public informational meeting, so that the public will have a chance to influence the design. So.
Thank you.
Just one last comment on that. I believe, if I'm correct, there is going to be a new light going up at the entrance to the Walgreens parking lot, just adjacent to the light in front of the Kings Highway 501, or is that not the case? Do you know what I'm talking about? If you were to come out of Kings Highway and take the right, heading toward, the new Walgreens, about,
With Brown Brothers. you
Like
said,
a hun-
right?
yeah. right there, I think.
There's a light there, a signal there already, whether the state has them upgrading it or whether it's a complete replacement. I'd have to check. Laura Pooley in our office was
Okay.
the reviewer for that particular project. I have to imagine the state would at least make them upgrade it somewhat, but whether it's a full replacement, I don't know.
Full replacement, no, I'm
Oh,
talking a new light.
No, there's a light there already.
No, I know there's,
Jennings.
I know, but I'm talking the 100 feet or so toward the building you just mentioned, where the entrance to Walgreens is.
I don't think
You don't think so?
No,
Okay,
I don't
then-
think so.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I'm good.
Good, thank you.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thanks.
Sure.
All right, item 7, from the Director of Public Works, to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution as recommended by the Director of Public Works. Resolved that First Selectman Mike Tetro is empowered and authorized to execute and deliver in the name and on behalf of the town of Fairfield an agreement with the State of Connecticut and the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection for a 2014 America the Beautiful Urban Forestry Grant in an amount not to exceed $3,800, the local match being in-kind service approved in the 2015-2016 Department of Public Works budget. May I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
A second.
Second.
I believe it's your department again, Joe.
It's my department, but the people that actually worked on it were Mary Hogue, Jeff Stedman, who's not here, and Jeff Minder. So if there's any questions, I'll defer to
Okay.
Mr. Minder or Mrs. Hogue.
Could somebody just briefly step us through what's involved in this project?
Good afternoon, Jeff Minder, tree warden. The grant that we're going to hopefully receive and be awarded, the American Beautiful grant, we're going to use for informational sign kiosks throughout the town. We're going to try to target some points of interest, historical points, that will give the residents or residents from other towns that are coming into Fairfield the opportunity to enjoy and make their time here more pleasurable by reading the signs and understanding the points that, you know, we have in town and the interest and the historic importance that we have throughout the town. I have a picture it's not the exact replica of what we're going to do, but it's in the town of Norwalk, and it's similar to what we would be doing throughout the town as well.
Sure.
Also, if I may include this in our forestry committee management plan that was approved in December, this is one of our goals and one of our points that we would like to obtain throughout the years is our outdoor exhibit panels that we will be putting up throughout the town, not only with this grant, but hopefully with future grants. Okay. Any questions?
I have a couple. Unless
Go
you
ahead,
want to-
go ahead.
Please.
Could you step us through, when you talk about putting these up around town,
Yes.
what I hear is, okay, who's involved, who's approving, who's looking at what, where they're going? So those are things like from economic development, from the Historic District Commission, to the Chamber of Commerce,
We will
to
be...
this
Yeah.
board. Can you step us through what the
Yeah, Mary,
process
would
is from
you,
here?
if I could call Mary, Mary worked on the grant as well, so...
Hi. Yeah, we have just started working with Mark, and I am also working with the museum, so we're working towards understanding what it is that the different groups would be interested in. We had our monthly forestry meeting this morning, and we're forming a subcommittee so that we can not take up our forestry committee meeting, but just have this group focus and work directly with those folks. We've been in touch with, actually, I worked with Eileen to talk about, handicap accessibility, to see how that might play into it. So we're just in the beginning of it, but we don't have sites located yet, but this is part of our public outreach and public education part of our goals on the forestry committee, and so we want to make sure people understand the importance of the urban forest and the benefits of trees. So those are the main points. So we're not going to be highlighting a specific tree, because if that tree falls down, then that sign really doesn't do us a whole lot of good. So it's really more of a generic discussion or educational signage about trees and the public spaces in general.
Okay. The concept of making Fairfield more tourist-friendly and making the walks through town, as we're encouraging bike and pedestrian walks, making that more informational / more enjoyable, I think is a noble cause. The concern, just listening to is kind of, when you mentioned signage, what signs, where do they go? Is it downtown? Is it further away? That type of thing. So I don't mean to put you on the spot now.
Our plan is to
I
be
think-
in the most heavily trafficked places possible, so the most people would make use of this information. So, we definitely want to be in downtown because we think that that would be a good thing for economic development, and Mark, and I've talked about that, and he feels very strongly about that. So Sherman Green is a very good example of a public space that has lots of beautiful trees that we could use. There are other places that have come up, but we just want to make sure that there's enough traffic throughout the area as well as accessibility for people to be able to get to the signage.
And again, certainly reasonable guidelines. I guess what I'd ask is when we have a better concept of what the plan is, that we certainly come back before this board, before we expend funds or start any installations, so we can have a better view
Oh, yeah.
and perspective of what's taking place. Because as you mentioned the parks, that also brings up Parks and Rec as having kind of
Yep.
input on that. So.
And we've been talking with them as well.
So it certainly seems like kind of a far-reaching thing. And the idea, and I was at a center program this morning honoring their new logo and what they're doing, and very exciting in terms of what's taking place there. But we had talked about the idea of points of interest. If we're going to, again, encourage biking and walking, that we have to give people some incentive to bike and walk to places, and when they get there, tell them what it's all about and why it's a point of interest. So I think in the long term, we definitely need to address some of these points, and I'm very impressed that you've taken the initiative and the lead on doing that, which is, I would argue, on one hand, perhaps a little broader than just the Forestry Committee might be. On the other hand, I think it's visionary on your part to look beyond the basic definition of that. So thank you for doing that.
It's a team effort, for sure.
Okay.
Is your purview really just identifying trees or,
The
it's
Forestry
not the
Committee?
Forestry, it's not looking at historic sites of interest for Fairfield. It's really looking at helping people identify a tree. I just want to get the distinction of what the grant would be used for.
The Forestry Committee is set up to help and support the tree warden. So anything related to any trees in public spaces. So this would most likely be things within the public right-of-way, not deep into open space, though, we haven't determined where they'll go. But making it as much as possible so that people understand that the point of having a tree and the right tree in the right place, which is a very important point now that we're going through our right-of-ways to clear the lines, that we're getting through that pilot. So we're really trying to make sure people understand all the different facets of what a tree means to them, because there's a lot that people don't realize that it can add a lot of value.
Sure, and I agree with that approach. I just want to be clear because the picture we have is of historic Norwalk Harbor. We're not talking about
No,
pointing
that's
out
just a sample
historic
of
Just a
another
sample.
project.
sites in Fairfield, but what our first selectman was saying is maybe we could broaden that purview, or might look at broadening the purview depending on, where this goes. Does that make sense? I just wanted to kind of distinguish between what you're doing and what you were just kind of talking about.
Well, that's in part where I'm looking for them to come back with kind of a more complete plan, so we're talking some concrete recommendations. Forgive
The
the use of the
reason
term
we-
concrete. but-
Yeah, the meeting. We originally were going to do one large panel, and the museum recently put in several smaller panels, and we got a look at their quote, and we were so excited to see that they got such a great price, and the size was smaller, and we, part of our meeting, we investigated how they were manufactured and what they said and how they looked, and we thought that we could actually do more than one. So since we submitted our grant request, and just actually in the last 2 weeks, we have a whole new change of perspective, and now we're thinking of more than one site. So that's new to us. So that's why we really don't have a lot of information at this point. But it's great to get that kind of interaction with all the different groups in town, so that we are able to now think in a bigger way, which is exciting.
Certainly touching on a lot of groups, and it might be intriguing also to take a look down around the senior center to see what might be incorporated there, and encouraging some of our members from there to get out and walk around if there's points of interest. I'm not
Yep.
saying there are around
That was
there,
another one of the sites that we had discussed this morning. So
That
were you sitting in on that meeting? We were in here with the Bud.
No, I just think our town needs can certainly use some of those things. And again, if we're going to expect people to walk, we've got to give them something to walk to and for and learn at the end of that. I think that encourages smaller kids to also participate in the walking, so I think that would be good too. Kevin, did I notice your hand going up?
No, I just wanted to say thank you, and I do look forward to having you come back and seeing the complete plan and maybe some samples of the signs and whatever other information you can share at that time.
Great.
Right. And just as
Congratulations.
Selectman Marmion's point earlier, if you could kind of come back so we can see what the plan looks like before we get started here, just to make sure we're all thinking and comfortable with the
Right.
same
Absolutely.
piece. But again, I do want to compliment you on kind of thinking kind of over the border here a bit in terms of not sitting inside one little box and say this is all we do. But certainly, and it also kind of fits in well because you have just recently completed an inventory
Of the pilot areas.
Okay, of the pilot areas or the
Well,
trees overall? 'Cause
We did a survey,
Okay.
which is not an inventory. An inventory is each tree. We did a 10% of the survey overlaying the census data with our roads so that we tried to do a representative sample. So yeah, so then we did, and then that was an input by our deep urban forestry folks for us into iTree so that we can actually give value for what those trees mean in terms of the value to our town and replacement value, and they get cut down, which is why we did the inventory on the pilot areas for the tree trimming, so we can see exactly when the trees are coming down, what that value is meaning to us.
And then you mentioned the Canopy Project too. Could you tell us a little bit, give us just a quick update on what that is?
The Greater Bridgeport.
I was not the tree, to be honest, was not the tree warden at the time. I know Joe was very active and very involved in the Greater Bridgeport Canopy study and program on that. I'm getting information. If Joe could just touch on that as well.
The tree canopy inventory was literally a 30,000-foot view of the town, done off aerials, and it projects how much of the town is forested, how much is not forested. And one of the things that happens in our developed communities, a lot of our trees predate the developments. So as a development is built in 30, 40, 50 years, eventually people take down trees and they don't replace them. So the tree inventory that was done gives us a benchmark of where we stand, and I think it was done about a year ago. So where we stand so it's a benchmark. So as we go forward, we like Mary said, we believe in the value of trees. We promote the value of trees, but this is a great tracking tool to see if we can maintain our tree canopy. And a lot of our areas in the remote areas are heavily forested, and they're going to stay heavily forested. A lot of our developed areas where we have quarter-acre lots are the ones that we're fearful that it won't maintain into the future. So that's what the purpose of the tree canopy inventory that was done. So we have a benchmark tool going forward to say that in fact that we are gaining ground, or staying even, or losing ground.
Was that Canopy Project completed before Storm Sandy?
No, it was post Sandy.
Okay. All right, any further questions?
I just wanted to mention, since we had our meeting this morning, we also talked about our tree planting program, which relates to this whole idea of making sure that we have enough trees in all locations, not heavily wooded areas and then a sort of a barren wasteland. And so the town, it's actually on Fair TV, we have a slide to get the word out that we have the tree planting program, because this is the time of year to plant the trees. And some of our neighborhood associations are actually helping in their particular areas to underwrite getting more paying for portions of the trees. So I know the Beach Association is doing that, and we're working with getting in touch with the other neighborhood associations to see how we can try and keep that promotion going throughout the town, because there are, as Joe said, there are some areas where it's really sadly missing trees, and it's a quality of life issue that really we could improve just by planting a tree that really doesn't cost much money, means brings in a whole lot of value, both intrinsically and quantifiably, so.
I know I've personally gotten several mailings from the Fairfield Beach Residents Association, which is great to see. If somebody, either an individual or a group, was interested in participating in this program, since we are on Fair TV going out to the town, who would they call, who would they contact, how do they get involved?
If any group or neighborhood association or any resident throughout the town would be interested in replanting or planting a tree, they can contact myself at the town garage, and my phone number 203-256-3178.
That's 256-3178.
Or email jminder@fairfieldct.org, and I will get, what I will do is I'll go out and we will assess the site and the area, and we will recommend which species of tree can be planted in that area. Just I may note with the tree canopy, is it is hard to reforest in certain areas now with a lot of the different invasive insects and things that are going on in our environment. So moving forward, if we do lose some of the larger trees in the area, we still are trying to encourage street line trees with some lower growing trees and species that are more adaptable to the current situations that we're in. So if we lose some of the larger maples and the oaks and we lose some of our canopy, we're still trying to replant with smaller, low growing trees that'll have beneficial for our street line trees as well.
Yeah. At the Audubon program this morning, I learned that the state tree is the oak.
Yes, it is, the white oak, yes.
Very good. Okay.
I just have one follow-up question,
Absolutely.
because this is an interesting program, but if you, so I'm just trying to figure out how it would work. So if an association or a group is interested in participating in this program, so
Yes.
they do some fundraising to raise some money to purchase the trees, would you assist the group in identifying an area to plant those?
Absolutely.
By individual.
Yeah, what it is,
That's-
yeah, absolutely. We would go with the association approach us to certain either areas throughout the public right-of-way
Okay.
in front of, a resident, a house where it would warrant the planting of a new tree. So
And would you assist in the planting
we
of
would.
the
It's a
tree?
subsidized
Okay.
program, so basically what it is, it's a $150 fee to the residents, and the town will subsidize the rest through the labor and the maintenance of the tree.
I think the assumption is that the people calling you up would primarily want to plant trees on their property?
It
or
would be
whereabouts?
within the public right-of-way.
Okay.
We don't
Okay.
plant on private property, it would be within the public right-of-way.
Gotcha.
But
Okay.
it's a public-private partnership.
Right.
We work with them to
Exactly.
help pick the proper tree. We're looking for biodiversity, so as much as we love dogwoods in Fairfield, we don't want all dogwoods, because if something happens where we get a disease or a pest, we've lost all our trees.
Okay.
And they are very susceptible. We also ask that the homeowner helps to water the tree. But the cost of the tree is $150 unless your neighborhood association helps to subsidize that. And so the program is really meant for the individual, not for the association. So any property owner calls up and says, I have a spot that I think is a good place for a tree. Can you help me? We're working on automating it so that you can do everything online. We've been working with the First Selectmen's office and that's one of the things we've been talking to Parks and Rec and Jerry, helping us figure out, can we use their system that they use for online payments? So we're really trying to make it so it's as easy as possible and lower the bar in terms of problems or issues that could prevent people from signing up to do this.
Very interesting, thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Since that is a motion, that is before us, any comments from the public? Seeing none, back to the board. Are we ready to vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you. Okay, next up is to review and approve department head, it says compensation on here specifically. This is an item according to our charter that the Board of Selectmen is charged with evaluating on an annual basis, but it relates to salary only, not full compensation. And just some guidelines for any public comment would be, we're asking no comments on individuals. We're realizing that this is a salaries-only item, and again, the Board of Selectmen is fulfilling its obligation per the town charter. Now, we each, in what's been distributed to each of the selectmen is a spreadsheet with my recommendations for the department heads. So I guess as a start, may I have a motion to accept these recommendations?
So moved.
A second.
Second.
Okay, so it's now before us for discussion. Does everybody have a copy of what we're discussing? All right. What you have before here is each of the 15 department heads. You have their names, their job classification, the salary that they're earning in fiscal year 2014, 2015, and then the recommendation for what they would earn in fiscal 15-16. There's also, in one case, there's a stipend in addition to that for one of the department heads, which is laid out on the sheet. And in another case, one department head is reaching a 10-year anniversary, and there's a longevity bonus increment that comes with that. Far right-hand column, you can then see what the total salary would be for each of the individuals listed here. I think in terms of laying that out, as what we can do is certainly happy to answer any questions on the recommendations. It would be my recommendation we treat this as a group. If there was any one person that we wanted to talk about in specific, I would ask that we amend them, in essence, out of that and come back at a future meeting to address any specific questions on that when that individual could be back here also. You'll notice that the recommendations were based in part on the individuals in question and how they did in meeting their annual goals and objectives, as well as their overall performance through that. And I guess I should also say the overall, and looking at them as a group, when you look at the total increase for this group, it's 1.95%, under 2% in a year-to-year basis. That 1.95% is under where our typical union settlements have been. So it's a kind of a market check on that. So with that, let me open it up to any discussion or questions from the board.
Please. If you could, Mr. Cheshire, if you could just give us a little bit of insight on the process you used and the process you went through as a group and in your evaluation.
Oh, simply, we went, my Chief of Staff, Tom Bobrowski, has been working with each of the department's heads on their goals and objectives throughout the year. So we had Tom's input with that. We also had my observations in working with the department heads and how they handled their departments and situations that came up throughout the year. As a second part, and I sent this out as an email to the both of you, we have a comparison of people in these positions. It's surrounding towns, Greenwich, Norwalk, Stamford, West Hartford, then some smaller towns, Milford, Stratford, and some smaller towns, Trumbull and Westport. Now, the difficulty in doing that is for certain functions like police and fire, it's pretty straightforward. As you look at some of the other job classifications, be it community and economic development.
I printed a couple of those before I came over.
Yeah. Community and economic development, human resources, health to a certain degree. Some of the other job classifications are not necessarily standardized from one town to another, and certainly there are differences in size of the different towns, so consequently the complexity of the job. For the most part, you will see that some of the larger cities, the compensation can be a bit higher than what we're paying our folks. For some of the smaller towns, it can certainly be lower in that regard, and in some cases may not even be a full-time job. So the goal was to, much like you do, frankly, in the private sector, is look at what, how folks performed against their goals and objectives, look at how they handled anything else that came up throughout the year. Mr. Dabrowski and I sat down together and evaluated each position. So individually, we came up with the rankings and compensation from that.
Okay.
Does that help?
It does help, thank you. And I know last year when we had this conversation, and I believe it was the first time we went through it at the Board of Selectmen level, I believe we had a conversation with the Director of Human Resources, or we had some communication with her on if we had a formal review process in place. And I think at that time, it was more informal than formal. And so I was just wondering, what steps we have taken in the last year from an HR perspective, in addition to the management process that you just described, to formalize the annual review or an annual, 360 process if you're using those types of analyses.
Simply, I actually don't remember the conversation with the Human Resource Director, but I
It might have been
do
offline.
remember.
It might have been offline.
Okay. Do remember you
Right.
bringing that question up, so that's
Yep.
fair for an update.
Sure,
Uh,
sure.
What we've done this year is this is actually the first full year. We've had a kind of a chief of staff in place because that position got interrupted for a bit. One of Mr. Dabrowski's jobs was to work with each department head. So we formalized more of the goal and objective process and worked with the department heads going through that. The town historically has not done a very formal process along those lines, so we're trying to make that more formal and also bring the different department heads kind of up to kind of a common ground in terms of what we're expecting in terms of goals and objectives on an annual basis.
Okay.
So we still have some steps to go to get to one of the more formal programs like the 360 approach
Right.
you referenced. So we are not there yet,
Okay.
but we're much further along than we were in
Yeah.
terms of meeting with the department heads on a regular basis to review performance, progress against goals and objectives,
Okay.
and
And getting the goals and objectives outlined and
correct.
put out there so people
But
can
also
achieve them.
measured against. One of the challenges has, since I came in, since that process wasn't in place when I got here 4 years ago, the challenge has been to carve out the time to sit down by looking at Mr. Dabrowski's time as chief of staff to say, okay, well, what I'm assigning you is one of the objectives of meeting with the department heads on a regular basis, so we can kind of keep that rolling. As different events happen in town, it's sometimes easier to meet with certain department heads because they're very active in those events, projects or initiatives that we're going through. But the goal is to systematically make sure we're sitting down with everybody on a regular basis and to make sure everybody's included in that, working towards their goals and objectives throughout the year.
Does that, I'm just curious, beyond the department heads, does our HR department kind of have a formal review process for people below the department heads who are staff?
In general, no. Some of that's covered within union contracts and labor agreements. There are certain, some of the contracts would have an evaluation form that may or may not be used systematically.
Interesting, I didn't realize that. I would think
Yeah.
that it would be more
Formal.
formalized.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And we had a similar conversation a year ago, and I think the general sense of it was that those are good concepts and good ideas that are used in the private sector. I mean, Human Resources reports to me and my company, and we do our best to maintain that communication that you spoke about in the meetings that you mentioned, and then kind of weave into it a formal process, whether it's once or twice a year. It sometimes can be difficult to do more often than that, but it's good to have benchmarks, and it's good to have meetings that you can refer back to and documents that support the meetings, so that when you get to the end of the year, there's more science and it's less anecdotal.
And regardless, this is my opinion, regardless of whether or not you're in a union contract, or, you're going to get sort of an automatic, nothing or
Right.
increase, I think the review process is very important for staff and department
Right.
heads to kind of assess how the department overall is going, and just to give that constant feedback. So
Right.
I'm not sure if other towns, municipalities don't use that formal review process, but it seems to be a good opportunity to sit down and have a back and
Yeah.
forth in
Yeah.
terms of how things are going.
Right.
Wouldn't necessarily argue that. I think two things. One, it hasn't been in place historically. I would point out that it hasn't been in my experience that any other towns that I've talked to have
Right, and that I
anything in
don't
place
know.
on that.
Yeah.
Certainly, talking to Human Resources
Mm-hmm.
and having them take a look at that. Well, be honest, what we're doing here
Mhm.
is looking at department
of
heads.
course,
Right.
of course.
And because these are department heads that aren't involved in unions,
Right.
we have a bit more flexibility in how we do that. And
Mhm.
and then from a standpoint of putting in a larger program,
Mm-hmm.
as they get used to this, this is one part of the training that would help in terms of putting that forward.
Absolutely.
So we've kind of
Right.
established this kind of top-down, if you will,
Mhm.
leading by example with this group and saying, here's what we're expecting to do, here's how we're doing it, and to get them comfortable,
Mhm.
as well as educated about the process. And each year, we expect that to get better and a bit more formal as we go through.
And as nice as it would be to have a formal review process for all the hundreds of employees that we have, it might not be as practical as it sounds in my company, where I have 90 people, right? And we don't have the contracts to deal with. But specific to these 15 people, it's critically important, because these are the 15 senior managers. This is the
Driving the town.
executive staff
Sure.
of this organization, and measuring their performance and making sure that their goals and objectives are clear and met is mission critical, because they are the leaders.
Absolutely.
They set the example. They manage the people beneath them, and it's very important for them to have that message of professionalism and good management, both for themselves and for the people that represent them out in town. So I think it's I would reiterate the conversation from last year, that the more steps we can take toward formalizing a review process with these 15 people, and they're a great bunch of people. They represent our town well, and that's not my point. My point is measuring it, understanding it, and then pushing it down from them so that everyone can benefit from their knowledge and expertise. So I strongly encourage HR to continue along the path to formalize those processes. Absolutely. The other question I had is, you mentioned the average was 1.95. I did a quick analysis on here. There's 3 or 4, like what I call outliers here, right?
Right.
And if you toss those 4 outliers off, most of these raises are either 2 or 3%, and I think the average hovers around 2.5. So that's a pretty accurate assessment of it.
Correct.
Okay, and that's where my math came out. Okay.
And in terms of just sort of looking at years past, has that 2.5 kind of median been typical, or is it not typical? I don't know.
There's been, I think, 2 things. One, up until recently, last 2 or 3 years, it was in reading through the charter a couple of years ago, I came across the phrase that says it's done by the Board of Selectmen, per the charter. When I took this job, I was informed that it was the first selectman's job to set the raise. So the first year, and perhaps the second,
Mm-hmm, yeah.
I did it per what I was informed was the process. In coming across that in the charter, we went back and said, hold it, we've got to get the Board of Selectmen involved. As part of that, Selectman McCarthy Vahey, your predecessor, actually talked to several other towns around. I talked to several, Bob Mayer talked to several, just to kind of get a flavor for what other towns did. So from that standpoint, we've kind of learned a little bit from what some other towns do, and we realize there's a wide range of informal processes out there. Some towns a little bit more formal, some towns a lot less formal than where we are. So how long we've been doing this, it's relatively recent that it's been addressed by the Board of Selectmen. If you go back, certainly the department heads have had raises in the 0 to 2% range when it was less formal, because it was a kind of an across-the-board thing, as I understand it.
Okay.
And that was
Okay.
predates some of my tenure.
Okay. Do you
and-
recall what you did last year
A similar process to this.
in terms of the amount or the
A
percentage?
similar process to this.
Similar, okay, okay.
All right, so we're kind of formalizing a little bit more, both in terms of the approach here as well as the evaluation approach overall. And the goal is to kind of continue to improve that aspect of our work. Does that help?
It does help.
It does.
I do think that our department heads do an excellent job. I think you may have mentioned earlier that they do more with less, more and more. They do more with less in terms of what they're given in terms of budgets. And they really, I think they work hard and do a great job for the town. I do think there's been a lot out there in terms of, overall compensation for department heads. I'm so sorry. This is a new phone and I have to learn how to turn it off, actually. It really is a new phone. Do you know how to figure that out? Turn it off. Honest to God, it's got a new case and I don't even know how to get through to the case to get to my office. But there's been a lot of discussion about overall compensation for department heads in terms of defined benefit versus, sorry, it's my daughter, defined benefit versus defined contribution, and then the amount that they're giving into the healthcare costs. So I think, this is kind of on people's minds in terms of looking at the salary increases versus what we're going to be looking at in terms of overall compensation. So I appreciate that you differentiated for us at the beginning that we are purely speaking about salary increases.
That's the charge, if you will, or what's defined in the charter.
Exactly.
For us,
Right.
for the Board of Selectmen to deal with.
That's all our purview is.
And
Yes.
the timing is such that with the recommendations we make here will kick in on July 1st, so that they'll be effective the first payroll of the new year.
And that's a valuable point, because, whenever you hire someone or wherever you're working, your overall compensation is most important, right? It's
Right.
not just your salary.
Right.
And while that may not be what's in front of us or what is within our ability to vote on today, I do think it's an important matter for us to study and maybe redefine and possibly roll that into whether it's I'm not sure if it would be possibly part of a charter revision where it was clearly defined
Right.
who looked at it, how often, what they looked at, who was in charge of it, who voted on it, and all that stuff that's not crystal clear today, but is very important. So whether it's an ordinance, I don't think it would be, or a town charter amendment or revision, I think it's important for us to crystallize that process as well.
Yeah, I think from a standpoint of just process, it's pretty clear at the moment that it has been the first selectman's role.
Right.
And I'm not quite sure when that started, but when I took the position, that's what was handed to me. It's just the first selectman role
Yeah.
to sort that out. And we do our best to kind of roughly follow what I'll call the mid-manager guideline in terms of what their benefit role it is. There are some differences. The department heads don't get overtime. The department heads don't get comp days. So there's some things, and there's steps in the mid-manager's program for additional increments, that type of thing, that aren't in here, and obviously their salary increments are not subject to annual review and evaluation that determines where that is. So we're trying to introduce a certain level of that here. Previously, it's my understanding that department heads got the same raise across the board. So that's been one of the other incremental changes we've made, which I think is good from a management standpoint and sets the proper incentive, but that also culturally is a very different change for what we've been doing previously.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of different changes going on in the last couple of years. I think we're going to have to make sure we have a teenager here who can deal with these technologies.
Don't give it to
Sorry.
me.
I am a teenager.
It's a new case, and I can't even open the new case to get to the power on off.
Spend some money in it.
It's locked up.
Give it to your children when you get home. They'll
I
figure it
will.
out.
Those are the ones who are calling me, unfortunately. So-
All
Sorry.
right. Would you mind if we
Last
go to...
comment, I had one more comment, and we touched on this last year. And, you know, we are the Board of Selectmen, and we are charged with making this salary-only vote on this. And I'm very respectful of the 15 people who manage our departments and do a great job for us day in, day out, representing our town and leading their people. But there's nobody who should know or does know more about what they do than you. They all report to you. You are the CEO. You see them every day. We see them on occasion. We see them at meetings and in hallways. They're in your office every day or every week, and you literally manage them. So it's very important to get your opinion on the people and the recommendations and look at this globally as a board. But I certainly, to a high degree, must defer to you from an evaluation perspective on, you know, who's doing a great job, who's doing an excellent job, who's doing an okay job, and where that relates to where we put their salaries only. So, I mean, you know, thank you for the work, and I certainly need to, you know, everything is within a range. We don't have any, you know, 10s or 20s or crazy numbers. So the numbers appear to be within a reasonable range, and if they're falling within the criteria for how you're evaluating the people, and we're getting better at that with an HR formal process moving forward, I think this is a good step forward.
Well put.
Okay to go to the public? Any comments from the public? Seeing none, back to the board. Any further comments from the board? Have anything else to add? No. Do you have anything else?
Nothing, no.
All right. If I might, I've got a few thoughts here. Just because I know that there have been some conversations going on around town, and certainly everybody's sensitive to this, but, and Mr. Kiley, in part, in response to the questions in a little more fuller answer than what we were just talking about. But I'm going to suggest that the department heads are a critical resource to our town. We count on their experience, skill, and dedication. When you look at our town, service levels are up over the past 4 years. We've definitely improved customer service across a number of departments. Our fiscal year 16 budget increase was 1.6%. That's the lowest in 15 years, and it fully funds all the services needed for our community. In continuation of the last 4 years, I'm going to reflect that over 4 years, the total tax increase has come to 10.8%. That's the lowest for Fairfield in 20 years. It's fully meeting our short and long-term obligations. And when you look at that, I believe that makes us one of the more efficient governments in the county. Our average increase this year for the department heads was up 1.9%. I think 1.95 actually. If you look back at the various union settlements, including the recent one for teachers, that was considerably higher than that. This is for a group that gets no overtime and no comp days. And when you take into account recent events like Storm Sandy, Storm Irene, Storm Nemo, concerns about Ebola, PCBs, the critical nature of some of our fires, our school security, and other serious events that we've had in town, from finding a homeowner with explosive devices and 300 and something guns in his house, you realize that what we really want for our town are the best available managers. The overall increase is on a par with town unions, and as I mentioned, lower than the recent Board of Ed increases that were approved by the RTM. And you won't see many, if any, of our department heads in the top 50 wage earners that is annually posted in the paper. When we ask people to do more with less, we're really asking our department heads to do more with less, improve service levels in a town with an increasing population. We certainly are improving our service levels, and there's no question Fairfield is one of the few towns in the state that has an increasing population, and certainly we know that from an increasing school population. Fairfield delivers services, as I mentioned, more efficiently than other towns, and perhaps the best indicator of that is expenses per capita, or the expenses per person called upon to fund the services of our town, both from Board of Ed or public education to public safety with police, fire, and DPW to the other departments. Fairfield spends about $4,650 per person. That's a fiscal 14 number. And Greenwich spends approximately $6,012 per person, and Westport approximately $7,112 per person to deliver roughly the same set of services. Our department heads are the key reason we're able to achieve that efficiency. Our department heads are the key reason why Fairfield is special. They're key to delivery of top quality service. They're key to keeping costs under control. And they're key to keeping our tax increases to the lowest in 20 years over the last 4 years. So with that, as a follow-up, are we ready to vote?
Just one more quick question.
Okay.
And thank you for that, information. The spending per capita is a very valuable number for us to hear and to know about. My question is, the incremental salaries, or the salary raises that we're talking about, we have already accounted for an estimate for them in the contingency for next year.
Correct.
So, give or take a few dollars and a few decisions along the way, these dollars are already accounted for in next year's budget estimate and are not incremental in total to the budget.
Correct. Is that, and that's following the guideline in the charter that they're already included in the budget and don't have an impact on it.
I just wanted to be clear on that.
Nope. Thank you for making that point. All right, then, are we ready to vote?
Yes.
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Next item up is for this board to set the selectmen's salaries for the next term. And again, much along the same lines, to be clear, per the charter, and again, this is based on an interpretation from actually 4 years ago that we are implementing this year for the first time. And I think the board has been up to speed on the letters and rulings, both the opinion of our town attorney from 4 years ago, or opinion of our town attorney currently. It's been discussed at the Board of Finance meetings that we, I believe, all sat in on, and discussed at least with RTM leadership as we've gone through this. We are setting the compensation for the next Board of Selectmen. For the salary adjustments we make and vote on here today will not take effect till after Election Day. Will not take effect till the next board sits down. To specifically address that, and because we were trying to get, I think, to a little more arm's length with that, because I think we all felt a little discomfort voting on Board of Selectmen salaries, though that is what's defined in the charter, we did ask a committee to advise us on what that increment should be. It was made up of 2 members of the Board of Finance, Mr. Tom Flynn and Mr. Bob Stone, and 2 members of the RTM, Mr. Phil Peers and Mr. Ed Bateson originally, but Mr. Hurley, because Mr. Bateson couldn't continue on the committee. So they have given us an email with their recommendations that was circulated out to the body earlier. And I don't know, do we have any extra copies of that, Jen?
I wasn't given any.
Okay. If there's anyone who would like a copy of that letter, we can get that for you immediately after this meeting. But I will, and to be absolutely clear, this letter is advisory. It is not a requirement that we do this, but we thought it best to get the advice from our other 2 boards. So with that, actually, and I'm thinking that with your
Do you wanna
permission,
read
I
it?
would just read
I
it.
think
Yeah,
that makes
Mr.
sense.
Yeah, Mr. Flynn, and that's why I had it up on my
Yeah,
phone.
me too.
He had requested that we read into the record the email and the quote at the end, so if you want to do that, that's fine.
Yeah, I will do that.
If you want me to do it, I'll read it, doesn't matter.
I'll be happy to.
Great, okay.
Just figuring out where to start here. But this is, as of their meeting last night, the committee welcomed new member Mike Hurley from the RTM and briefly updated him on past deliberations. All committee members were present. General discussion ensued surrounding information that that they had received on compensation history, as well as comparable compensation for towns throughout the state of Connecticut. It was noted by committee members that we had relatively limited scope with which to work, i.e. salary related to compensation for the Board of Selectmen. And again, that is as defined in the charter. With this in mind, the committee unanimously approved a recommendation of a 2.5% salary increase per annum for the 4-year terms, both for the first selectman as well as for the 2 selectmen. Further, the committee unanimously approved a statement that would like to be included in the Board of Selectmen discussion of our recommendation and to be considered in the next Town of Fairfield Charter revision process. The committee would further like to recommend that the next Charter Revision Committee review in detail the total compensation structure for the Board of Selectmen. Specifically, the committee would like addressed which town body should approve the salary, as well as all other elements of compensation for the Board of Selectmen, including benefits, stipends, and any other forms of remuneration. The committee recognizes that the first selectman position is unique, as well as elected, in town government, and our view is that all manner of compensation, as defined above, should be considered separate from all other town employees to ensure his/her uncompromised ability to lead negotiations for the rest of the employee population. And then with our business concluded, the meeting adjourned at 8:15 on Tuesday, June 23rd, and given the above, we believe the committee's charge has been completed. Respectfully, Thomas F. Flynn, who is also chairman of the Board of Finance. All right, so our charge is to set the Board of Selectmen salaries for the next term that will take effect in November after the election. Is there a motion before us? Would someone like to make a motion?
Before discussion? Yes. So I
think
make a
generally
motion
we'd
to
need-
set the Board of Selectmen salaries for the next term.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. So that's before us. Any discussion on that?
Well,
Mr. Carley?
yeah, please. The first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to thank the committee for all their work. I know they met and they worked hard on this project, and they've done us a great service. And I certainly concur with the comments that they're making about how the process is looked at going forward, much like we just talked about with the department head compensation. If the charter revision could include an update to that process on what the components of the compensation are, who reviews it, who approves it, and, clearly define that process. I think we're all better off as a town, and we'll have a clearer understanding of, the complete process for how we get to where we are. So I certainly want to thank them for their work, and I'll turn it back over to you guys.
I'm just wondering if anybody had specific conversations with members of the committee in terms of their rationale for the 2.5 increase. Was it looking at other towns? Was it simply this was what they thought was appropriate based on precedence? I'm not, again, I'm just trying to get some scope here in terms of how they came up with that number.
Let me answer one part of that, and I think
Okay.
Mr. Conley may have some other background.
Maybe, yeah.
The committee was given both the kind of current salary arrangements for the Board of Selectmen, which are also included in the budget book and
Sure.
approved as part of the
Sure.
annual budget process. In addition, they asked for information for surrounding towns, so I got them a list of the first selectman / mayor salary for the 160-odd towns in Connecticut.
Okay.
We didn't have and I got that from CCM,
Okay.
Conference of Cities and Municipalities. We don't have information on selectmen salaries because it varies so dramatically, especially with a lot of the smaller towns. And the bigger cities, most actually comparable to Fairfield, have gone to a mayor plus city council
Gotcha.
format. So it's not as consistent, and the data wasn't available for that.
Yep, that's consistent with the conversations I had with Chairman Flynn about the information that they received, and they also received specific information on our earnings throughout the course of the last couple of years, just to validate them against the budget. But the information is all in the budget, give or take a payroll on one end of each year, right?
Right.
So that information was made available to them, and, I believe they just took all that information and, considered it, and had their conversations and made a recommendation. I wasn't at the meetings.
So I think that obviously the other piece of consideration is that if you look at the last 4 years, as you all are well aware, the annual increment was 0, 0, 3%, and then 0.
For us, as a board, yes, that's
the board.
correct. It was, yes, we've been 0, 0, 3, and 0, and there was 1 year, I think it was 2 years ago, that we trimmed our stipend a little bit, our travel stipend. Was that 2 years ago?
I think the two selectmen might have done that.
The selectmen
The
did.
first selectman did.
Correct. Okay. So that's some history if it's helpful.
And the travel stipend, which, to be honest with you, it surprised me when I got that check, and I called up Chris and I said, I've just gotten a check and I'm not sure why. Is that in the budget?
Yes.
That's
If you go back and-
considered within?
If you go
I'm not
back
sure
and look
where
at
to
the
find
budget
it.
book,
Right.
I can show you which line item it is.
Okay.
Again, but what we're doing here is
The salary
looking
only.
at the
Salary.
salaries.
I understand. I just
Right.
wanted to
Right.
be sure that people understood that that is something that the selectmen get and that it is in the budget, because I was surprised. So the 2.5, I understand. I just needed some perspective in terms of how they came to this decision, and interestingly enough, it was unanimous. So
Yeah.
I'm very pleased that we went to an outside committee. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's a strange position to be in, to look at, raising or not raising or keeping the same your own salary. So I'm very comfortable with, the fact that there was a committee bipartisan and that it was a unanimous decision.
And to put that in perspective, I'm going to say historically, but I actually don't know for how long. During my tenure on the Board of Finance, and Kevin, you were on there longer than I was, the selectmen's compensation was set by the Board of Finance.
That's correct.
That seemed to
Yes.
make sense at the
Right.
time. Again, until 4 years ago when the question was raised, and
Right.
the then town attorney pointed out that it's kind of not the job of the Board of Finance. That's not defined in state statute, charter, ordinance anywhere.
Well, can I just
So-
raise another point that was
Sure.
raised in the letter from the committee, which is charter revision?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a date that this might happen? How do we bring
Okay.
about that charter revision? I'm just,
Yeah.
to give people some perspective on.
The charter revision is a function of when it's requested by our board.
Our
So,
board.
Our board.
Okay.
So we're in charge of that. We would both identify the time, and we'd identify the items we would like considered.
Okay.
There's been a change in charter revision process, I'm going to say 3 or 4 years ago. Whereas historically, when you opened up charter revision, you opened up Pandora's box. The entire charter was on the table for revision. That, I think, was perceived throughout the state as something that limited charter revision, so as much as there might be some things you want to fix, there might be a whole bunch of things that didn't want to be fixed, and opening up that opened up kind of more options than perhaps received. There's a change in state statute that now allows the Board of Selectmen to specify which parts of the charter, or which sections of the charter, we would like to see reviewed within that.
Okay.
So that would be, and from a timing standpoint, it's something I've looked at each year. I think at this point, if I'm around, if we're around, it's something that I would strongly recommend for next year, a year from now. Because I think we've collected enough data points, we've collected enough issues that we want to make sure we have an opportunity to answer. Certainly some things that have come up recently, literally within last year, if we'd done this previously, we wouldn't have considered as much. So I think that the timing is right for doing that, and if that would be my recommendation.
Good, that helps, thank you.
I would agree with that. In fact, the one example that comes to mind, and there are many, is we just went through all the questions on bonding. And
exactly.
our bond counsel was very clear that not only did our charter not address the issue of bonding very well, that many other towns have sections that are very specifically dedicated to it, and they're very clear on what you can do, what you can't do. And we just went through a long round of conversations about that. So there's another example of something that would be added to the list. And there are many others. So I guess, I know we're off topic here, so I'll stop quickly here, but it kind of makes me wonder, what is the process for beginning to gather the list of things that we would like to take a look at? Is that something that your office can work on or has worked on, or do we set up a committee to look at the charter and identify the areas? How does that first layer start?
Yeah, we'll set up a charter revision committee to take a look at that. But I think the first layer starts with us individually.
Sure.
And I've reached out to some members of RTM leadership, some members of the Board of Finance, and said, please start kind of writing down your list.
Make it a list.
As we're going through things, and certainly the bond approval process is one, that's on my list.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
sooner or later, it comes back to the members of the Board of Finance, or Board of Selectmen, to vote on the items to be considered by the Charter Revision Committee.
Right.
As I understand it, and because there have been some recent changes, I'm not trying to suggest I'm up to speed on all of it. So it's something that would have to be looked at to make sure that we follow the appropriate process and look at what the options are. But I think it starts with, one, identifying a need for it, and two, individually having lists for items that can be considered by whoever's going to evaluate that. But I believe it's the Board of Selectmen that would do that.
Makes sense. Good.
All right. So back to the topic at hand. And I think it probably makes sense for somebody to make a motion. We're not legally obligated to follow the recommendation of this committee, but it seems to make sense to make a motion before this board to get their recommendation before us, so we can say that we followed their recommendation.
Yes. I will make a motion. I will move to adopt the recommendation delivered by the Selectmen Compensation Committee last evening at their meeting.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion or comments along those lines? I've got a couple thoughts in there too, but Mr. Connolly, you indicated you had some things to say.
Just a couple quick comments. I mean, the committee, and we touched on these, the committee is a great group, and they worked hard, and I think they looked at all the facts and information, and they came away with what they believe is a fair and reasonable recommendation on the salary piece only, as well as some other very strong recommendations on process going forward. And I believe they've made a strong recommendation, and I would like to respect the work that they have done, and I would support their recommendation.
It's we got their recommendation this morning. I've actually gone back and forth on some things, and my first thought was that was more aggressive than I certainly was expecting or anticipating. But having talked to, gotten some feedback from members of the commission, and I think this is where it gets a little hard for us, because we're not, unlike the department heads where we're giving individuals raises,
Right.
we're giving the next board. So it means really looking at this from a position standpoint, from the board standpoint, independent of who we are. So as much as I might feel that is higher than anticipated and a lot at one time, we tend to deal with raises over 4 years. Right? And so if you were to equate the last 4 years to this, it would be 0.75 per year, less than 1% a year is what this board achieved in that time period. So this is a bigger adjustment, and that simply on one hand causes me concern. On the other hand, we did reach out to 4 people. We did reach out to the Board of Finance and the RTM and ask for their help and ask them to take on the job of thinking through this. They didn't have to do that. It's not part of their charge. And they spent the time to do that and took that charge quite seriously based on their questions, the information they asked for. And if you look at their recommendation, as much as their charge was just about the salary component, they did look a little bit beyond that and say, how do we improve the process? And certainly if we look at charter revision, this would be one of the things that we'd like some clarity on and look at some different options and maybe explore how different communities do this. Because to some degree, every community with a Board of Selectmen has this issue. There are opportunities to be very political about this, and I think it was Simsbury, where in fact the city council, with a majority of one party, voted a decrease for the first selectman of another party. That in fact, because that whole thing blew up, the first selectman in that case resigned, both midterm and shortly after being elected, which defeats the will of the people. So I think the goal in any of these is to keep it nonpartisan and non-political. And I think that was the goal in picking 4 people that not only represented 2 different boards, but were also evenly balanced by political party. So and that's a long way of saying that I have gone back and forth on that. I'm at the moment probably tending to go along with the committee advice and your recommendation on that. Did you have anything to add?
No, I think I had mentioned before that I'm glad there was a committee set up. I think they did a good job. I want to thank them. And I respect, that they came to this determination and that it was unanimous. And I think that we asked for their input, and I'm happy to accept it.
Any further comments?
No.
Any comments from the public? Okay, back for the board. Any further discussion before we vote? Anything?
No.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, and again, thank you to the committee for their work. And again, I am hopeful that we can have a charter revision to formalize either this process or a better process between now and 4 years from now, which is the next time this item would come before the Board of Selectmen. Moving on to item 10, the tax collector, to consider and act upon tax refunds as recommended by the tax collector in the amount recommended. I have a motion to accept.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion or amendments?
I'd like to make an amendment. I can't remember what the language is, sorry.
To place a comma after recommended and place a number.
To place a comma after recommended and insert the amount of $15,552.39.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Next item up. Jen, is the town attorney coming today?
Well, I don't realize that, so I don't know.
You need to vote on the amendment.
Oh, sorry, we need to vote on the amendment, my apologies. The item, the tax collector item as amended is before us. All in favor of the item as amended?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, so that passes unanimously. I don't see the town attorney here.
Yeah.
Elaine is here, but I didn't see her stand.
Eileen?
Yes.
we've got an item here for private executive session with the town attorney.
With our attorney for workers' comp.
Okay, is Mr. Aiken here?
He is.
All right. Then may I have a motion to go into private executive session?
So moved.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are now moving to private executive session.
Oh, that's so, are you kidding me?
May I have a motion to come out of private executive session?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
While we're in private executive session, no motions were made and no votes were taken. Now we're back in public session. May I have a motion to accept the attorney's recommendations in both the attorney's recommendations?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Attorney Aiken.
Thank you.
Eileen, thank you. All right, may I have a...
Nice
Yep.
to meet you, thank you.
May I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, take care.
Thank you. Can you deliver that to